Millionaire CEO fires pregnant cleaner for being too slow. Security camera reveals the truth.
Mr. Whitmore, you need to see this. I wish I'd checked these cameras yesterday before you—
Before I what, Marcus? Before I fired a cleaner who disappeared for 6 hours during her shift? I don't have time for this. I had the Singapore investors arriving in 4 hours, and my entire East Garden smells like a sewer because someone didn't do their job.
Sir, she did do her job. That's what I'm trying to show you.
What are you talking about? I walked the entire property twice yesterday. She was nowhere. Not in the main house, not in the guest quarters, not in the—
She was here, behind the mansion. Camera 8. The blind spot we almost never check because there's nothing back there but the old drainage system and—
That's her? That's Lois?
For 6 hours, sir. 6 hours.
My God, what is she?
The main drain was completely blocked. She's been down in that pit since 7 a.m. Watch, right here. She tries to call maintenance, but there's no signal behind the mansion. So she just does it herself.
She's pregnant, Marcus. 6 months pregnant and she's down in. I fired her. I stood in my study and I told her she was lazy, that she was wasting my time, that people like her.
There's more, sir. At the 10:42 mark, you need to see. Sir, I called her apartment this morning. The landlord answered. She was evicted 3 days ago. The final paycheck you gave her yesterday, it wasn't enough to stop it. And sir, she's 7 months pregnant now. I don't know where she is. I don't know if she's safe.
What have I done? Marcus, find her. I don't care what it costs. I don't care if you have to search every shelter, every hospital, just find her. Please.
Sometimes the truth hides in the places we forget to look. In the blind spots of our assumptions, our judgments, our pride. And sometimes, by the time we finally see it, the damage is already done. This is a story about a woman who gave everything, a man who saw nothing, and a security camera that captured the moment everything changed. But to understand how we got here, to this room at 3:47 in the morning with a CEO staring at footage that would shatter his world, we need to go back. Back to 3 months earlier. Back to the day Lois Carter's life fell apart, and the impossible choice she made to survive. Before we proceed, permit me to welcome you, my lovely family, to another heartwarming story. If you're new here, we wholeheartedly welcome you. To cement your place in this community, please hit the subscribe button now. Don't also forget to hit the notification icon bell to ensure you are the first to see our new story tomorrow. 3 months before Julius Whitmore would stare at a security screen in horror, Lois Carter sat on the bathroom floor of her small apartment, holding a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines, and a note that would destroy her world. The note was simple, cruel in its simplicity. I can't do this anymore. Nancy and I are leaving. Don't try to find us. Eric. 6 years of marriage. 6 years of building a life together, of promises whispered in the dark, of dreams shared over morning coffee. Gone in 23 words, scrawled on the back of a grocery receipt. Nancy. Her best friend since high school. The woman who'd been her maid of honor. The woman she'd trusted with her deepest fears and brightest hopes. The woman who had sat at her kitchen table just 2 weeks earlier, helping her plan how to tell Eric about the pregnancy, smiling and hugging her and saying all the right things while secretly planning to steal her husband. Lois didn't cry that first day. Shock has a way of freezing tears before they can fall. She simply sat there on the cold tile floor, one hand on her barely there belly, the other clutching that note until her fingers went numb. The apartment around her felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. Eric's coffee mug still in the sink. His jacket still on the hook by the door. Pictures of them still smiling on the walls. Lies frozen in frames. It took 3 days before the crying started. And once it started, Lois wasn't sure it would ever stop. But crying doesn't pay rent. Grief doesn't put food on the table. And a baby, wanted or not, planned or not, needs a mother who can survive. So Lois did what she had always done. She survived. She picked up extra shifts at the diner where she waitressed. She took a weekend job stocking shelves at a grocery store. And when she saw an advertisement for a cleaning position at the Whitmore estate, offering twice her current hourly wage, she applied without hesitation. The Whitmore estate. Everyone in town knew the name. Julius Whitmore, tech millionaire turned real estate mogul, 37 years old and worth more money than most people could imagine in 10 lifetimes. His mansion sat on the hill overlooking the city like a crown, all glass and stone and perfectly manicured gardens that seemed to mock the struggling neighborhoods below. Lois had driven past it 100 times, never imagining she'd one day walk through its gates with a mop and bucket. The interview was brief. The estate manager, a stern woman named Patricia, looked her up and down with the kind of assessment that made Lois feel like a piece of furniture being evaluated for purchase. "You'll start at 6 a.m., Patricia had said. "The main house, the guest quarters, the pool area, and the grounds. Mr. Whitmore is very particular. He doesn't like to see staff. He doesn't like disruptions. You do your job quietly, efficiently, and invisibly. Can you do that?" Lois thought of her empty bank account, her growing belly, the eviction notice she'd received that morning, the first of what would become many. "Yes, ma'am," she'd answered. "I can do that." What Patricia didn't tell her was that Julius Whitmore wasn't just particular. He was exacting to the point of obsession. Every corner had to be dust-free. Every surface had to gleam. Every cushion had to be arranged at precise angles. He had cameras everywhere, though as Lois would later learn, he rarely watched them. He simply wanted staff to know they were being observed. It was a way of maintaining control without having to interact with the people who served him. For 2 months, Lois existed in Julius Whitmore's world like a ghost. She arrived before dawn, when the mansion was still dark and quiet. She cleaned in silence, moving through rooms that cost more to furnish than she'd earn in a lifetime. She avoided the main hallways when Julius was home. She learned his schedule, his patterns, his preferences. She never saw him up close. Just glimpses, distant and disconnected. A figure in an expensive suit climbing into an expensive car. A shadow passing behind glass. A voice on a phone call, sharp and commanding, echoing through empty hallways. He never saw her at all. The pregnancy progressed. Morning sickness made the early shifts brutal. By month 5, her back ached constantly from bending and lifting. By month 6, her feet swelled so badly she could barely fit them into her work shoes. But she pushed through because she had no choice. The diner had cut her hours. The grocery store had let her go, citing performance issues that Lois knew really meant, "We don't want a pregnant woman who needs bathroom breaks." The Whitmore estate was all she had left. She'd started showing now, impossible to hide even under the loose cleaning uniform. Patricia had noticed, but said nothing. Julius, true to form, remained oblivious. Until the day everything changed. It started with a smell. Subtle at first, then growing stronger throughout the week. Something was wrong with the drainage system behind the mansion. The area was overgrown, forgotten, a tangle of old pipes and wild vegetation that dated back to when the property had been a working farm decades earlier. Lois had reported it to Patricia. Patricia had called maintenance. Maintenance had quoted 2 weeks and $3,000 to snake the drain. Julius had apparently said no. Too expensive for a problem that wasn't immediately visible. Fix it next quarter when the budget allowed. But nature doesn't wait for budget approval. And on a Tuesday morning in late September, with Lois 7 months pregnant and exhausted from another sleepless night of the baby kicking her ribs, the drain finally surrendered to gravity and decades of neglect. By the time Lois arrived at 6 a.m., The smell was overpowering. The ground behind the mansion was soggy, water pooling in places it shouldn't. She found the source quickly, a massive blockage in the main drainage pipe, overflowing with decades of leaves, mud, and things she didn't want to identify. She tried calling Patricia. No answer. Tried calling the maintenance number. Straight to voicemail. Tried calling the main estate line. It rang and rang into emptiness. The sun was rising. Julius would be up soon for his morning routine. He had important guests coming for dinner that night. Patricia had mentioned it 3 times. Business partners from Singapore. A deal worth millions. Everything had to be perfect. Everything. Lois stood at the edge of that blocked drain, 7 months pregnant, exhausted, alone, and made a choice that would change her life forever. She rolled up her sleeves and climbed down into that pit. The work was brutal. The smell made her gag within minutes. She had to stop twice to vomit into the bushes. Her back screamed in protest. The baby kicked constantly as if sensing her mother's distress. But Lois kept digging, kept pulling, kept clearing. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Her phone had no signal back here, buried behind the mansion in a dead zone that the expensive telecommunications couldn't reach. She was alone with the work and the smell and the determination that had kept her alive through Eric's betrayal and Nancy's lies and every impossible day since. She didn't know that Julius had walked the property twice looking for her. Didn't know he was growing angrier with each passing hour. Didn't know that in his mind, she had simply disappeared, abandoned her post, proven herself to be exactly what he expected from people he considered beneath him. Lazy. Unreliable. Not worth the money he paid her. By the time Lois finally cleared the drain, climbed out of that pit covered in filth and exhaustion, and made her way back to the main house to clean herself up, it was past 2 in the afternoon. 8 hours. 8 hours in that forgotten corner of a forgotten drainage system, doing work that wasn't in her job description, solving a problem that maintenance had quoted thousands to fix. She opened the service entrance with shaking hands, ready to report her success, ready to finally sit down and rest. Julius was waiting for her. His face was cold. Not angry, cold. The kind of cold that's worse than rage because it comes from a place of complete dismissal. He looked at her the way someone looks at a broken appliance they're about to throw away. "My study," he said. "Now." Lois followed him on legs that trembled from exhaustion. Her uniform was stained despite her attempts to clean up. She could still smell the drain on her skin. The baby kicked hard, as if it knew something terrible was coming. Julius's study was all dark wood and leather, walls lined with books he probably never read and awards he probably didn't remember earning. He didn't sit. Didn't offer her a seat. Just stood behind his massive desk like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. "I don't know where you were today," he began, his voice flat and emotionless. "I don't particularly care. What I care about is that I pay you to do a job, and you were nowhere to be found for 8 hours. I walked this entire property. Twice. You were invisible." "Mr. Whitmore, I can explain," Lois started, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. The drainage system behind the mansion, it was completely blocked and— "I don't want excuses," he cut her off. "I want reliability. I want staff who show up and do their jobs without drama, without complications, without—" his eyes flicked to her pregnant belly, dismissive and cold, "without personal problems interfering with their work." The words hit like physical blows. Lois felt something crack inside her chest, something that had already been broken but was now shattering into pieces too small to ever put back together. "I have guests arriving tonight," Julius continued. "Important guests. Everything needs to be perfect. You've made that impossible. Patricia will have your final paycheck ready within the hour. Collect your things and leave." "Please," Lois whispered, and she hated the desperation in her voice but couldn't stop it. "Please, Mr. Whitmore, I need this job. I'm 7 months pregnant and I—" "That's not my problem." For words, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had never known what it meant to need anything. "We're done here." Marcus, the head of security, appeared in the doorway. Kind eyes and a weathered face, the only staff member who'd ever really talked to Lois like she was human. He looked uncomfortable. "Marcus will see you out," Julius said, already turning away, already dismissing her from his mind as easily as someone deleting an email. Lois walked through that mansion one last time. Past the rooms she'd cleaned until they sparkled. Past the windows she'd polished until they disappeared. Past the life she'd never have and the man who'd never see her as anything more than hired help who'd failed to meet his standards. Marcus walked beside her in silence until they reached the service gate. Then he paused, his hand gentle on her arm. "I'm sorry, Lois," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, you were the best cleaner we've had in 5 years." She tried to smile. Failed. "Thank you, Marcus." "Do you have somewhere to go?" The question nearly broke her. She nodded, lying, because the truth was too heavy to speak aloud. She had an apartment for maybe 3 more days before the eviction became official. She had $17 in her bank account. She had a baby coming in 2 months and no way to provide for it. She had nothing. Marcus must have seen it in her face because his expression shifted to something like pain. But he was just an employee too. He had no power to change what had happened. So he simply nodded and opened the gate. Lois walked through it and didn't look back. Behind her, in the mansion she'd just left, Julius Whitmore returned to his study and forgot about her before he'd even sat down. There were emails to answer, calls to make, a dinner party to prepare for. The cleaning staff was easily replaceable. There were always more desperate people willing to work for whatever scraps the wealthy offered. He had no idea that in less than 24 hours, he'd be staring at a security screen, watching footage that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had no idea that the woman he'd just fired had saved his dinner party, his business deal, his precious reputation, while he'd walked past her suffering without seeing. He had no idea that sometimes the things we overlook contain the truths we need most to see. But he was about to learn. You know, it's easy to judge people by what we see on the surface. Easy to make assumptions about who works hard and who doesn't, who deserves our respect and who's just trying to get by. But life has a way of revealing the truth, doesn't it? The real story hiding behind our blind spots and assumptions. If you're enjoying this story so far, and you want to see more content that digs deep into life's unexpected truths, consider subscribing. There's so much more to uncover. That night, Julius Whitmore's dinner party should have been perfect. His chef had prepared a 7-course meal. His sommelier had selected wines that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His servers moved through the dining room like synchronized dancers, anticipating needs before they arose. The Singapore investors, 3 men in tailored suits with careful smiles, sat at his table discussing numbers that would make Julius even wealthier than he already was. Everything was perfect, except for the smell. It started subtle, barely noticeable beneath the aroma of truffle risotto and aged wine. But as the evening progressed, it grew. A creeping, undeniable presence that no amount of expensive candles or opened windows could mask. Julius, one of the investors, a man named Mark, said carefully, setting down his fork, "Is there perhaps a problem with the plumbing?" Julius's jaw tightened. "I apologize, gentlemen. There was a minor drainage issue earlier. It's been resolved." But it hadn't been resolved. Not really. What Lois had spent 8 hours trying to fix had been a temporary patch on a problem that needed professional equipment and expertise. Without her there to finish the job properly, without maintenance willing to come out on emergency rates, the drain was failing again. And it was failing spectacularly. By the time dessert was served, the smell had become undeniable. One of the investors excused himself, claiming jet lag. Another followed 5 minutes later. By 9 p.m., Julius's business deal was walking out his front door with polite apologies and promises to revisit the conversation that both parties knew meant never. Patricia found him an hour later standing in his study, staring out at the dark gardens, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. "Sir," she began carefully, "maintenance can come first thing tomorrow morning too." "Get out," he said quietly. "Sir." "Get out." Patricia left. Julius stood alone in the dark, his empire intact but his pride shattered. A drainage problem. Years of building his reputation, months of negotiating this deal, and it fell apart because of a smell from a blocked drain. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so infuriating. He tried to sleep that night. Couldn't. His mind kept circling back to the embarrassment, the investors' barely concealed disgust, the deal slipping through his fingers. He thought about the cleaner he'd fired. What was her name? Lois. Lois something. He tried to remember her face and found he couldn't. She'd been invisible to him, exactly as he'd wanted. At 3 a.m, unable to quiet his thoughts, Julius went downstairs to his study. That's when he saw Marcus's light still on in the security office. Marcus never worked this late unless something was wrong. Julius found him at the monitors, his face illuminated by the blue glow of multiple screens, his expression troubled. "Marcus? What are you still doing here?" The older man, startled, turned. Something flickered across his face. Guilt? Concern? Julius couldn't read it. "Mr. Whitmore." Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I think you need to see something, sir. Unless it's footage of those investors deciding to give me another chance, I'm not interested. It's about Lois Carter, the cleaner you fired yesterday." Julius felt irritation spike through his exhaustion. "What about her?" "Sir," Marcus's voice was steady but firm, "you need to see this. Please." And that's how Julius found himself at 3:47 a.m., staring at security footage that would change everything. Marcus had queued up multiple camera angles from the previous morning. Julius watched with growing confusion as Lois appeared on screen, arriving at her usual time, moving through her usual routine. Then she disappeared off the main cameras, and Marcus switched to camera 8. The forgotten camera. The one that covered the overgrown area behind the mansion that no one ever bothered to monitor because nothing ever happened there. "There," Marcus said quietly, pointing. Julius leaned forward. The image was grainy, black and white, but clear enough. Lois, very obviously pregnant, standing at the edge of the blocked drainage pit. She was on her phone, presumably trying to call for help. Then she lowered the phone, stared at the mess in front of her, and made a decision. "My God," Julius whispered as she began to climb down. "Keep watching," Marcus said, his voice heavy. Julius watched. 6 hours of footage condensed into fast forward, but even sped up, the work was brutal to witness. Lois, 7 months pregnant, digging through decades of muck and debris with her bare hands. Stopping to vomit. Resting with her hand pressed to her lower back. The baby must have been kicking because several times she paused to place both hands on her belly, breathing through what was clearly discomfort or pain. But she never stopped. Never gave up. Never climbed out and walked away. At one point, around noon in the footage timestamp, she pulled out something massive from the drain, a twisted root system that must have weighed 50 pounds. Julius watched her struggle with it, watched her finally heave it free, watched her sit down hard on the ground afterward, exhausted. Then she stood up and went back to work. The blockage was completely cleared by 1:47 p.m., Marcus said. She then spent 20 minutes covering the evidence of the overflow, trying to make it look like nothing had happened. Trying to protect the property. "Your property, sir." Julius couldn't speak. His throat had closed around words that wouldn't form. Marcus switched to another camera. "This is you at 10:15 a.m., walking the grounds, looking for her." There he was, striding through his perfect gardens with his phone in hand, irritation evident in every line of his body. The camera angle showed what he couldn't have seen, Lois 50 yards away, hidden behind the mansion in that forgotten corner, covered in filth, working herself to exhaustion while he stood in the sun, judging her absence. And this is you at 2 p.m. when she returned to the house. Julius saw himself from a different angle now, saw the coldness in his own expression, the dismissive way he looked at Lois's pregnant belly, the casual cruelty in his posture. He heard his voice on the audio, tinny and distant through the camera's microphone. I don't want excuses. He watched Lois try to explain, watched himself cut her off, watched the exact moment something broke in her eyes. That's not my problem. The footage ended. The monitors returned to live feeds. Marcus said nothing, letting the silence do the work that words couldn't. Julius stood frozen, his reflection staring back at him from the darkened screen. He looked like a stranger. Looked like the kind of man he'd always sworn he'd never become. His mother's face flashed through his mind. Sarah Whitmore, who'd worked 3 jobs to raise him after his father left. Who'd cleaned houses not unlike this one, coming home exhausted every night, her hands red and raw, her back permanently bent from years of labor. Who'd died when Julius was 23, just before his first company took off, never living to see him become successful. Who'd have been ashamed of the man he'd become. Where is she? Julius asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, sir. I called her apartment this morning. The landlord answered. She was evicted 3 days ago. The final paycheck you gave her yesterday, it wasn't enough to stop it. Julius closed his eyes. And sir, Marcus continued quietly, she's 7 months pregnant now. I don't know where she is. I don't know if she's safe. The words hit like hammer blows. Julius saw it all with sudden, horrifying clarity. A pregnant woman, abandoned by her husband, he'd learned that much from the basic employment paperwork. Working multiple jobs to survive. Fired by a millionaire too blind to see her sacrificing herself to save his reputation. Now homeless with a baby coming in 2 months. Because of him. Marcus, Julius said, and his voice cracked on the name. Find her. I don't care what it costs. I don't care if you have to search every shelter, every hospital, just find her. Please. Yes, sir. Marcus stood, hesitated. Mr. Whitmore, what are you going to do? Julius stared at the blank monitors, seeing Lois's face in the empty screens, the exhaustion and the desperate plea he'd ignored. I'm going to make this right, he said. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to make this right. But Marcus's search over the next 18 hours revealed just how hard making it right would be. Lois wasn't at any of the local hospitals. Wasn't registered at any of the immediate shelters. Her phone was disconnected. Her mail was being returned. It was as if she'd simply vanished from the world, another invisible person that society had learned to stop seeing. Julius couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything except the footage that played on loop in his mind. He canceled meetings, ignored emails, sat in his study staring at Lois's employment file, the bare-bones information that told him nothing real about who she was. Name, Lois Carter. Age, 28. Previous employment, Sunrise Diner, Savamart Grocery. Emergency contact, none listed. No emergency contact. No one to call when things went wrong. No safety net except herself. Julius thought about his own life. His massive house that echoed with emptiness. His wealth that insulated him from ever having to know what struggle felt like. His success built on the backs of people he'd never bothered to see as fully human. He'd thought himself a self-made man. But his mother had made him. Her sacrifice, her labor, her love had built the foundation that let him succeed. And he'd forgotten that. Forgotten where he came from. Forgotten that every person who cleaned his floors or served his meals or maintained his property was somebody's mother, somebody's daughter, somebody's whole world. He'd forgotten how to see people as people. Lois had reminded him. Not with words, but with her invisible labor, her quiet determination, her refusal to give up even when the work was impossible and the pain was unbearable. She'd reminded him what real strength looked like. And he'd thrown her away like trash. On the second day of searching, Marcus finally got a lead. A shelter coordinator recognized Lois's description. Yes, a pregnant woman matching that profile had checked in late the previous night. Yes, she was still there. No, they couldn't give out her exact location without her permission, but if Marcus wanted to leave his contact information, Julius didn't wait. He had Marcus drive him to 3 different women's shelters until they found the right one. It was on the edge of the city, a converted church with peeling paint and a tired playground. The kind of place that existed because society failed people, then occasionally bothered to feel guilty about it. Julius stood outside for 10 minutes before he could make himself go in. What would he say? How could he possibly apologize for what he'd done? What words existed that could bridge the gap between his wealth and her desperation, his blindness and her suffering? There were no such words. Julius knew that. But he had to try anyway. He opened the door and stepped into a world he'd spent his entire life avoiding. The lobby smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. Worn furniture filled a space that tried hard to be welcoming, but couldn't hide the institutional sadness beneath. Women and children moved through the space with a careful posture of people who'd learned that taking up too much space was dangerous. A receptionist looked up, her expression shifting from professional welcome to surprise at seeing a man in a $3,000 suit standing in her doorway. "I'm looking for someone," Julius said, his voice rough. "Lois Carter." He paused, then forced out the truth. "I wronged her. I need to make it right." The receptionist studied him for a long moment, her eyes sharp with a kind of assessment that comes from seeing too many men make promises they don't keep. "Wait here," she finally said. Julius waited. 5 minutes felt like hours. He thought about leaving, about the cowardice that would be so much easier than facing what he'd done. But he stayed. Because Lois had stayed in that drainage pit for 8 hours. The least he could do was stand in this lobby for 5 minutes. When the receptionist returned, she had someone with her. Lois. She looked thinner than Julius remembered, her face drawn with exhaustion that went bone deep. Her pregnant belly seemed impossibly large on her small frame. She wore donated clothes that didn't quite fit. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She had dark circles under her eyes. She was the most beautiful thing Julius had ever seen, and the look she gave him was pure ice. "What do you want?" Her voice was flat, empty of everything except exhaustion. Julius opened his mouth. Closed it. Every prepared speech evaporated. He was left with nothing but the raw truth. "I saw the footage," he said quietly. "I know what you did. I know what I did. And his voice broke, "I'm so sorry, Lois. I'm so sorry." Lois stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned to walk away. "Wait, please," Julius stepped forward, not touching, not reaching, just desperate. "Please, just let me explain. Let me try to..." "Try to what?" Lois turned back, and now there was fire under the ice. "Try to make yourself feel better? Try to ease your guilty conscience? Do you have any idea what you've done? Any idea at all?" "No," Julius said honestly. "I don't. But I want to. I want to understand. And I want to help, if you'll let me." "I don't need your help. I don't need anything from you." But the words rang hollow, and they both knew it. She needed everything. Food, shelter, medical care, a future for her baby. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Julius saw the moment she recognized that truth. Saw something crumble in her expression, the last wall between dignity and desperation finally giving way. "Why?" she whispered. "Why now? Why do you suddenly care?" Julius thought of 100 things he could say. Thought of explanations and justifications and carefully worded apologies. But he was done hiding behind words that meant nothing. Because I saw you, he said simply. Really saw you. And I realized I've been blind my entire life. Lois closed her eyes. A single tear tracked down her cheek, and Julius realized she was crying not from relief, but from sheer exhaustion of carrying a weight too heavy for one person to bear alone. I can't do this right now, she said, her voice breaking. I can't, I just. You don't have to do anything, Julius said quickly. Just let me give you this. He pulled out a card, his personal number scrawled on the back in his own handwriting. If you need anything at all, please. No strings, no expectations. Just let me try to fix what I broke. Lois took the card with trembling fingers, stared at it like it might bite her. I fired you, Julius continued, the words thick in his throat. I judged you. I failed to see your humanity. And you're right to hate me for it. But please don't let your hatred of me stop you from accepting help. For your baby, if not for yourself. Lois looked up at him, then really looked at him for the first time. Julius forced himself to hold her gaze, to not look away from the pain and accusation and faint, fragile hope he saw there. I'll think about it, she finally said. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. But it was a chance. Julius would take it. He left the shelter with Marcus and sat in the back of the car, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Hands that had signed the termination paperwork without a second thought. Hands that had never done a day of real labor in years. Where to, sir? Marcus asked gently. The estate, Julius said. Then quieter. I need to start over, Marcus. I need to figure out how to be a better man. Marcus met his eyes in the rearview mirror. Nodded slowly. It's not too late, sir. It's never too late. Julius hoped he was right. Because he'd just promised to make things right, and he had no idea how to keep that promise. But he was going to try. He was finally going to try. The next morning, Julius woke up before dawn for the first time in years, not because of a business call or early meeting, but because he couldn't sleep. His mind kept circling back to Lois's face, the exhaustion etched into every line, the way her hand had instinctively moved to protect her belly when he'd stepped toward her. She was scared. Not just of him, but of everything. Of being alone, of having nothing, of bringing a child into a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. Julius understood that fear now in a way he never had before. Not because he'd experienced it, but because he'd finally allowed himself to see it in someone else. He made coffee in his enormous kitchen, the space feeling more hollow than usual. His mansion suddenly seemed obscene. 12,000 square feet for one man who barely lived in half of it. While Lois slept in a shelter, sharing a room with strangers, her worldly possessions fitting into a single donated duffel bag. The coffee tasted like ash. Marcus arrived at 7, earlier than required, but not surprised to find Julius already awake. I need everything you can find out about her, Julius said without preamble. Not just the basic employment information. I need to understand what happened to her. How she ended up, he gestured vaguely, unable to find words for the magnitude of what Lois had lost. Marcus nodded slowly. Sir, are you sure? Her private life is. I'm not trying to invade her privacy, Julius interrupted. I'm trying to understand how to help. Really help, not just throw money at the problem and feel better about myself. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. Give me a few hours. What Marcus uncovered over the next day painted a picture that broke Julius's heart. Lois Carter, born and raised 20 miles outside the city. Only child of parents who died in a car accident when she was 19. No siblings. No extended family that Marcus could locate. She'd worked her way through community college, met Eric Davidson at a coffee shop where she was waitressing, married him at 22. By all accounts, it had been a good marriage for the first few years. Eric had a steady job as a mechanic. Lois worked multiple part-time positions, but they were saving for a house, planning for a future. Their friends described them as happy, stable, the kind of couple that made you believe in love. Then something changed. Eric started working longer hours, coming home distant and distracted. The money they'd saved started disappearing, though Eric claimed it was car repairs and unexpected bills. Lois worked harder to compensate, picking up extra shifts, cutting back on everything, believing her husband when he said they'd get through it together. She didn't know he was spending the money taking Nancy out to dinners, buying her gifts, financing an affair under the guise of friendship. Nancy Morris, Lois's best friend since high school. The woman who'd stood beside her at her wedding, who'd been there through her parents' deaths, who'd promised to always have her back. The affair had been going on for 8 months before Eric finally left. 8 months of lies and secret meetings and stolen moments, while Lois worked herself to exhaustion trying to save a marriage that was already dead. Nancy's social media told its own story, posts and pictures going back months that showed her and Eric in restaurants, at parks, at the beach. Always carefully cropped to avoid showing them together too intimately, but clear enough in retrospect. They'd hidden in plain sight while Lois remained oblivious, trusting them both completely. The discovery had devastated her. Multiple friends reported she'd stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped engaging with anyone. She'd quit returning calls, isolated herself completely, and then she'd found out she was pregnant. Eric's timing in leaving became even more cruel in that context. He'd known. Must have known or at least suspected. And he'd run anyway, choosing Nancy over his wife and unborn child. The community had rallied briefly, Julius learned. Friends had tried to help. But Lois's pride, that fierce independence that had made her climb into a drainage pit rather than leave work undone, had made her refuse most offers. She'd insisted she could handle it. She'd make it work. She didn't need charity. Pride. It had kept her going and simultaneously destroyed her. She reported him, Marcus said, pulling up documents on his computer. Filed for child support. Eric responded by quitting his job and moving out of state with Nancy. No forwarding address. No way to enforce the support order. Julius stared at the paperwork, rage building in his chest. Can we find them? Probably. But sir, what good would it do? The legal system for these cases is complicated. Even if we located him, even if we got a judgment, collecting is another matter entirely. Julius knew Marcus was right. He also knew he'd make Eric pay anyway, eventually. But that was revenge, not help. Lois didn't need his revenge. She needed stability, safety, a future. What about her work history? Julius asked. Marcus pulled up another file. Impeccable. Every employer raves about her. She's never been late, never called in sick, never had a complaint filed. At the diner where she worked for 5 years, her manager wrote that she was the most dependable employee they'd ever had. At the grocery store, Marcus paused, his expression darkening. At the grocery store, they let her go when she was 5 months pregnant. The official reason was restructuring, but 3 people who worked there told me the real reason was the manager didn't want to deal with a pregnant employee who'd need time off. Names, Julius said coldly. I want names and locations of every place that mistreated her. Sir, I'm not going to do anything illegal, Marcus. But I have resources, influence, and I'm going to use them. Marcus nodded slowly. He understood. Julius Whitmore could make or break businesses with a few phone calls, a strategic review, a well-placed word in the right ear. It wasn't revenge, it was justice delayed. But again, that didn't help Lois now. Julius spent the rest of that day thinking, planning, trying to figure out how to offer help to someone who'd learned the hard way that accepting help came with strings attached. He couldn't just throw money at her. That would be insulting, demeaning, another reminder of the power imbalance between them. He couldn't offer her job back, Not the same job. Cleaning his toilets and scrubbing his floors while he pretended not to see her. He needed to offer her something real. Something with dignity. Something that acknowledged her worth instead of his guilt. The idea came to him at 2 a.m, keeping him awake for the third night in a row. The Whitmore estate wasn't just a mansion. It was a compound with multiple buildings, a guest house that had sat empty for years, gardens that needed management, property that required oversight. He'd been thinking about hiring an estate manager for months, someone to coordinate the various service providers and staff, to maintain the property properly instead of Patricia's barebones approach. He could offer Lois that position. Not charity. Not pity. A real job with real responsibilities and a salary that reflected the work. The guest house as part of the compensation package, giving her a home, privacy, safety. Healthcare included, obviously. Maternity leave. Everything she needed, framed as employment benefits rather than handouts. It was perfect. Except for one problem. Would she ever trust him enough to accept? Julius turned the plan over in his mind for 2 more days, refining it, making sure every detail was legitimate and professional. He had his lawyer draw up a contract. Had an independent consultant verify that the salary and benefits were more than fair, bordering on generous but not suspiciously so. Then he sat in his study, holding his phone, staring at the card he'd given Lois with his number on it, trying to work up the courage to call her. She beat him to it. His phone rang at 7 p.m. on a Thursday night. An unknown number that Julius almost didn't answer before something made him pick up. Hello. Silence. Then it's Lois. Julius's heart jumped. Lois. Thank you for calling. How are you? Tired. Her voice was flat. The shelter coordinator said you left information for me. Said you wanted to help. Yes. Yes, I do. I have a proposal, if you're willing to hear it. More silence. Then carefully, what kind of proposal? Julius explained the estate manager position, the responsibilities, the salary, the guest house, the benefits. He kept his voice professional, businesslike, trying to remove the emotional weight from the offer, making it about business, not charity. Lois listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for so long he thought she'd hung up. Why? She finally asked. Why are you doing this? Julius closed his eyes. Because I failed you. Because I see that now. And because you deserve better than what life's given you. This isn't charity, Lois. I genuinely need an estate manager. The property has been mismanaged for years. I'm offering you the position because you're qualified and you've proven you care about doing things right. I clean toilets, Lois said bluntly. That makes me qualified to manage your entire estate? You spent 8 hours clearing a drain that wasn't your job because it needed doing, Julius countered. You saw a problem and fixed it, even when it cost you everything. That's exactly what an estate manager needs to do. See what needs attention and make sure it gets done. Another long pause. Julius waited, barely breathing. I need to think about it, Lois finally said. Of course. Take all the time you need. The offer stands, no pressure, no expiration date. And if I say no? Then I respect your decision. But Lois, Julius hesitated, then pushed forward. This isn't about my guilt. Or rather, it is, but not in the way you think. I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back your apartment or your sense of security or the 2 months of pregnancy you've spent terrified and alone. But I can offer you a future. Not as an apology, but as recognition of your worth. You deserve this. That's why I'm offering it. Lois's breath hitched, just slightly. Julius thought she might be crying, but couldn't tell over the phone. I'll call you back, she whispered. Okay. The line went dead. Julius sat in the silence of his enormous house, holding his phone like a lifeline, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he'd said the right thing. 2 days later, his phone rang again. Same unknown number. "I'll take the job," Lois said without preamble. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "I want a real contract. Not something you can terminate on a whim. 3-year minimum guarantee." "Done." "I want separate living quarters. No expectations that I'm available 24/7 just because I live on site. The guest house is completely separate from the main residence. It has its own entrance, its own security code. Complete privacy." "I want," Lois's voice wavered, then steadied, "I want respect. From you, from your staff, from anyone who enters this property. I'm not a charity case. I'm an employee. I do my job, you pay me, we maintain professional boundaries." "Absolutely. And I want it in writing that this has nothing to do with," she paused, choosing words carefully, "with anything personal. This is business. Just business." Julius heard what she didn't say. She was protecting herself. Building walls to make sure she didn't get hurt again. He couldn't blame her. "I understand," he said gently. "This is purely professional. You have my word." "Your word didn't mean much when you fired me." "The words stung because they were true." "You're right. So let me show you instead. Let my actions prove what my words failed to." Lois was quiet for a moment. Then, "When do I start?" "Whenever you're ready." "Tomorrow," she said decisively. "I start tomorrow." "Tomorrow it is. Marcus will pick you up from the shelter at 9 a.m. Is that acceptable?" "Yes." "Lois." "Yeah. Thank you. For giving me a chance to do better." "Don't thank me yet," she said, and there was a hint of steel in her voice that Julius found himself respecting immensely. "I'm not easy to work for. I have high standards." "Despite everything," Julius smiled. "Good. So do I. I think we'll work well together." After they hung up, Julius stood and walked to the window overlooking his estate. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The garden stretched out before him, perfectly maintained by staff he still barely saw, let alone appreciated. Tomorrow that would start to change. Tomorrow Lois Carter would walk back through his gates, not as a cleaner to be dismissed, but as a professional to be respected. Tomorrow Julius would begin the work of proving he was more than the man who'd fired a pregnant woman for being too slow. Tomorrow, maybe, he could start becoming the man his mother had raised him to be before wealth and privilege had blinded him to basic humanity. It wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. And Lois had every reason never to trust him again. But Julius had resources, time, and now something he'd been lacking for years, a purpose beyond accumulating more wealth. He was going to make this right. Not for his conscience, though that was part of it. Not to feel like a better person, though he hoped to become one. But because Lois deserved it. Because her baby deserved it. Because every person who'd ever been overlooked and discarded and treated as less than human deserved someone to finally see them and say, "You matter." Julius pulled out his phone and made a call. "Marcus? Tomorrow morning, I want the guest house completely furnished. Not with my cast-offs, with new things. Everything a new mother would need. Crib, changing table, supplies. Whatever it costs, just make it happen." "Sir, didn't she say she wanted this to be professional? Not charity." "It's not charity. It's standard employer-provided housing. Besides," Julius smiled slightly, "she didn't say I couldn't make the housing nice. Just that I had to respect her." "And you're sure furnishing her entire home isn't crossing that line?" Julius thought about Lois sleeping in a shelter, her possessions in a duffel bag, her baby coming in less than 2 months. "I'm sure," he said firmly. "She's earned it. Besides, an estate manager needs to live in conditions that reflect well on the estate. I'm just maintaining my property value. Marcus chuckled softly. Whatever helps you sleep at night, sir. Marcus. Yes, sir. Thank you. For making me watch that footage. For not letting me stay blind. You're welcome, sir. But you're the one who chose to see. That's what matters. After they hung up, Julius returned to his window. Watched the last light fade from the sky. Watched his empire grow dark. All that glass and stone and carefully maintained beauty that had never felt like home. Maybe it never would. Maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was finding purpose beyond yourself. Finding meaning in helping others instead of just accumulating more. Maybe the point was letting a security camera, a blocked drain, and a woman he'd almost destroyed teach him how to be human again. Julius thought about tomorrow. Thought about Lois walking through his gates with her head held high, her baby moving inside her, her heart still guarded but willing to try. That took more courage than Julius had ever shown in his entire life. The least he could do was try to be worthy of it. Lois moved into the guest house on a Friday morning in early October, and Julius made sure he wasn't there to see it. He'd wanted to be. Wanted to welcome her personally, show her around, make sure everything was perfect. But Marcus had gently suggested that Lois might need space to settle in without her new employer hovering, and Julius had reluctantly agreed. So instead, he stayed in the main house, pretending to work while actually watching the clock and fighting the urge to walk over and check if she needed anything. It was Marcus who gave him updates throughout the day. She's seen the guest house. No visible reaction, but she spent a long time in the nursery we set up. She's unpacking. It took her less than an hour. She didn't have much. She's reading through the estate management materials you left. Taking notes. And finally, at 4 p.m., she asked to see you, sir. In your study. 5 o'clock. Julius spent the intervening hour pacing. He'd faced down ruthless business rivals, negotiated million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, given presentations to rooms full of skeptical investors with complete confidence. But the thought of sitting across from Lois Carter, seeing the judgment in her eyes, made his hands shake. At precisely 5 o'clock, there was a knock on his study door. Come in. Lois entered, and Julius's first thought was that she looked different. Not physically, she was still very pregnant, still tired, still carrying the weight of everything she'd been through. But she held herself differently. Straighter. More confident. The guest house, the job, the security, it had already started to restore something in her that Julius hadn't realized had been missing. Pride. Not the destructive kind that refused help, but the healthy kind that came from knowing your worth. Mr. Whitmore, she said formally. Please call me Julius. She hesitated, then nodded. Julius. I wanted to thank you for the accommodations. There, she paused, choosing words carefully, more than adequate. Adequate. The guest house he'd had furnished with everything a new mother could need, down to a rocking chair by the window and blackout curtains for nighttime feedings. Adequate. Julius found himself smiling. I'm glad you find it acceptable. Something flickered in Lois's expression. Almost amusement. It's beautiful. You know it's beautiful. But I'm not going to gush about it because that would make this feel like charity instead of employment. Fair enough. Julius gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit. Would you like anything? Water, tea. I'm fine. But she did sit carefully, one hand automatically going to her belly. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened between them filling the space. Lois broke it first. I've reviewed the estate management materials. I have questions. Of course. For the next hour, they discussed logistics. Staff schedules, maintenance needs, budget oversight, vendor relationships. Lois asked sharp, intelligent questions that made it clear she'd actually read and understood everything Julius had provided. She took notes, made suggestions, challenged some of his existing systems in ways that were both professional and entirely valid. Julius found himself impressed. This wasn't someone going through the motions of a pity job. This was someone taking her responsibilities seriously, bringing genuine value to the position. The landscaping company you use is overcharging you by about 30%, Lois said, flipping through one of the contracts. I know because they bid on a job where I used to work. Their standard rate is significantly lower than what they're charging here. Really? They're banking on you not knowing any better. Or not caring because the money doesn't matter to you. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly. Does it matter to you? Julius thought about his automatic answer, about brushing it off because what was a few $1,000s to someone with his wealth? But Lois was asking a different question. She was asking if he cared about being taken advantage of. If he cared about principle. Yes, he said. It matters. Can you handle renegotiating the contract? That's why you hired me, isn't it? Yes. Yes, it is. Lois made another note. I'll have new terms drafted by next week. If they don't agree, I'll find another company. Your garden deserves better maintenance anyway. You've looked at the garden? Something softened in her expression, just for a moment. It's beautiful. The roses especially. Someone put real thought into the design. My mother, Julius heard himself say. She planned the garden before she passed. I've maintained it exactly as she designed it. Lois looked up, surprised by the personal information. Julius was surprised he'd shared it. She had good taste, Lois said quietly. She did. Julius paused, then decided to push forward. She was a cleaner too. For most of her life. She would have his voice caught. She would have liked you. Lois studied him for a long moment. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand that I know better. Or I should have known better. My mother worked herself to exhaustion taking care of other people's homes, so I could have opportunities she never had. I built my success on her sacrifice. And then I turned around and treated someone doing the same work like she was nothing. Like you were nothing. Julius met her eyes. I dishonored my mother's memory. And I dishonored you. I'm not telling you this to make excuses. I'm telling you so you know that I understand the magnitude of what I did. Lois was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Understanding it doesn't undo it. I know. And telling me about your mother doesn't make us friends. I know that too. So why tell me? Julius considered the question. Because you deserve the truth. All of it. Including the truth that I'm trying to be better than I was. Not for my conscience, but because it's the right thing to do. Lois stood slowly, gathering her notes. I should go. The baby's been kicking all day and I need to rest. Of course. Julius stood as well. Lois, before you go, I want to make something clear. This job is real. Your position here is legitimate. But if you ever feel uncomfortable, if you ever want to leave, your contract has an exit clause that gives you 6 months of continued salary and housing. No questions asked, no judgment. You're not trapped here. Lois's eyes widened slightly. That wasn't in the contract I read. It will be in the revised version my lawyer is drawing up. You have all the power in this situation, Lois. I want you to know that. You can walk away at any time and you'll be financially stable enough to land on your feet. Why would you do that? She shook her head, that's not how employment contracts work. It's how ours does. Because I never want you to feel like you felt the day I fired you. Powerless. At someone else's mercy. You deserve better. Lois stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Then, so quietly he almost didn't hear it, thank you. She left before Julius could respond. He sat back down at his desk, his hands shaking slightly. That had gone, he didn't even know. Better than expected? Worse? Lois was still guarded, still wounded, still ready to leave at the first sign of betrayal. But she'd thanked him. That was something. It was a start. Over the next 3 weeks, a routine developed. Lois took to her role as estate manager with a competence that sometimes startled Julius. She renegotiated contracts, fired vendors who weren't performing, hired new staff with skills the estate actually needed. She created systems for tracking maintenance and repairs. She turned the chaotic, expensive mess that Patricia had been managing into an efficient, well-run operation. And she did it all while 7, then 8 months pregnant. Julius watched from a distance, trying to respect her boundaries while also being available if she needed anything. They had brief meetings twice a week to discuss estate business. Lois was always professional, always prepared, always slightly distant. But slowly, so slowly Julius almost didn't notice it happening, the distance began to shrink. It started with small things. Lois began arriving at their meetings a few minutes early, accepting the tea Julius offered. She started sharing opinions beyond just business, mentioning a book she was reading or commenting on the news. She asked Julius about his business, seemed genuinely interested in his responses. And Julius, for his part, learned to really listen. To see Lois not as a problem to fix or a source of guilt to manage, but as a person with her own thoughts, experiences, and value beyond what she could do for him. One afternoon in late October, Julius was walking through the garden when he found Lois sitting on a bench, both hands on her belly, her face tilted toward the sun. He almost kept walking, not wanting to intrude, but something made him pause. "Is everything okay?" Lois opened her eyes, not startled. She'd heard him coming. "He's kicking. Feels like he's trying to break out 2 months early." I found out last week. It's a boy. Something complicated crossed her face. I'm going to name him Daniel, after my father. That's a good name. My dad was a good man. I hope, Lois's voice wavered, I hope I can raise Daniel to be like him, even without a father around. Julius sat down on the opposite end of the bench, careful to maintain distance. You're going to be an amazing mother. How do you know? You barely know me. I know you spent 8 hours cleaning a drain while pregnant because it needed doing. I know you took a job working for someone who wronged you because it was the best option for your child. I know you ask questions, demand respect, and refuse to accept anything less than what you deserve. Daniel is going to be fine because he has you. Lois turned to look at Julius fully for the first time since he'd sat down. Really looked at him, not with suspicion or wariness, but with something that might have been the beginning of trust. You're different than I thought you'd be, she said quietly. Different from the man who fired you. Different from the man I expected when I took this job. I thought, she paused, I thought you'd try to make this about your guilt. Make me manage your feelings instead of your estate. But you haven't. You've just been present, respectful. It's unexpected. Good unexpected or concerning unexpected. Lois smiled for the first time since Julius had met her. It was small, tentative, but real. Good, I think. Still deciding. They sat in silence for a while, the October sun warm on their faces, the garden blooming around them in the design Julius's mother had created decades ago. Can I ask you something? Lois eventually said. Anything. Why did you really want to hire me? And don't give me the business answer about needing an estate manager. The real reason. Julius considered lying. Considered the safe, professional answer that would maintain the boundaries Lois had requested. But she'd asked for the truth. And she deserved it. Because I needed to prove to myself that I could see you. Really see you, not as staff or a problem or a source of guilt, but as a person deserving of respect and opportunity. I needed to know if I could change, if I could be better than the man who fired you. And he paused. I needed you to have the chance to choose your own future instead of having it dictated by circumstance and my mistakes. Lois absorbed this. That's a lot of pressure to put on one job. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's honest. I appreciate that. She stood slowly, wincing slightly. I should get back. My feet are swelling, and these benches weren't designed for pregnant women. Julius stood as well. Lois, can I ask you something now? She nodded. Are you happy here? Not content, not just making the best of it, but actually happy. Lois thought about it for a long moment, her hand on her belly, her eyes on the garden. I'm getting there, she finally said. For the first time in months, I'm actually getting there. It wasn't quite happiness, but it was hope. And that, Julius thought as he watched Lois walk back toward the guest house, was worth more than all his wealth combined. The call came at 2:37 on a Tuesday morning in mid-November. Julius was awake, couldn't sleep, staring at reports he wasn't actually reading when his phone lit up with Marcus's number. Sir, it's Lois. Her water broke. I'm taking her to the hospital now. Julius was out of bed and dressed before Marcus finished speaking. I'm coming with you. Sir, I don't think. I'm coming, Marcus. She shouldn't be alone. 20 minutes later, Julius was in the back of his car following Marcus's vehicle through empty streets, his heart pounding with an anxiety that had nothing to do with business or money or anything he'd ever felt before. What if something went wrong? What if the baby had complications? What if Lois needed something and he couldn't provide it? What if he lost this chance to prove he could be there for someone who needed him? The hospital was bright and sterile and filled with the particular tension that comes with new life and uncertain outcomes. Marcus had checked Lois in and was waiting in the lobby, looking tired and worried. How is she? They took her back already. Fast progression, apparently. First babies usually take longer, but Marcus shrugged helplessly. Julius sank into an uncomfortable plastic chair. Did she ask for me? No, sir. But she didn't say not to call you either. It was something. Maybe. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Nurses passed without making eye contact. Doctors disappeared behind doors. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, making Julius's exhaustion feel somehow more acute. At 6:15, a nurse finally emerged. Family for Lois Carter. Julius and Marcus both stood. The nurse looked between them, confused. I'm her employer, Julius said, the words feeling inadequate. She doesn't have any family. We're what she has. The nurse's expression softened. She's asking for Marcus. Marcus glanced at Julius, apologetic, then followed the nurse through the doors. Julius sat back down, trying not to feel hurt. He had no right to be there. No right to expect Lois to want him present for something so intimate and vulnerable. He'd fired her 3 months ago. The fact that he'd tried to make amends didn't entitle him to her trust. But God, he wanted to be there. Wanted to make sure she was okay, that the baby was healthy, that she had someone supporting her through this massive, terrifying, beautiful moment. Marcus returned 20 minutes later. She's doing well. Baby should be here soon. She wanted me to give you this. He handed Julius a folded piece of paper. Julius opened it with shaking hands. Lois's handwriting, slightly shaky but clear. Thank you for being here. You didn't have to be. That matters. L. Julius read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in his pocket next to his heart. At 7:42 a.m., a doctor emerged with tired eyes and a smile. She did great. Healthy baby boy, 6 pounds 8 ounces. Mom and baby are both doing well. Julius felt something tight in his chest release. Can we see her? Give them about 30 minutes. She needs some time to get cleaned up and bond with the baby. Then you can visit briefly. Those 30 minutes felt longer than the previous 5 hours combined. When they were finally allowed back, Julius hesitated at the door to Lois's room. Through the small window, he could see her propped up in bed, a tiny bundle in her arms, her face transformed by a love so fierce and pure it hurt to witness. She looked up and saw him, smiled, tired but genuine, and gestured for him to enter. Julius approached slowly, Marcus behind him, both men suddenly uncertain in the presence of this new life. "This is Daniel," Lois said softly, adjusting the blanket so they could see the baby's face. Julius looked down at the tiny human in Lois's arms and felt his world shift fundamentally. Daniel was perfect, impossibly small, his little fist curled against his mouth, his eyes squeezed shut. Dark skin like his mother's, a crown of dark hair, features that would someday be handsome but for now were just purely beautifully baby. "He's perfect," Julius whispered. "Lois, he's absolutely perfect. You want to hold him?" Julius stepped back, startled. I don't know how. I've never. Neither have I." Lois smiled tiredly. "We're figuring it out together. Come on, sit down. Support his head like this." Before Julius could protest further, he was sitting in the chair next to the bed, and Lois was carefully transferring Daniel into his arms. The weight of that tiny life settled against Julius's chest, and something fundamental cracked open inside him. Daniel stirred, made a small sound, then settled back into sleep, trusting and innocent and completely unaware that the man holding him had almost destroyed his mother's life. "Hi, Daniel," Julius said softly, his voice breaking. "Welcome to the world, buddy. You have no idea how lucky you are to have her as your mom." Lois watched them, something complicated in her expression. When Julius looked up, he found tears tracking down her cheeks. "Hey, what's wrong? Are you okay? Should I call the nurse?" Lois shook her head. She wiped at her face. "I'm so tired and so happy and so scared all at once," and she laughed wetly. "And for the first time since Eric left, I feel like maybe we're actually going to be okay." "You are," Julius said with absolute certainty. "You're going to be more than okay." Marcus cleared his throat gently. "I'll give you two some privacy. Congratulations, Lois. He's beautiful." After Marcus left, Julius and Lois sat in comfortable silence. Julius held Daniel, memorizing every tiny feature, while Lois rested back against her pillows, watching them with heavy-lidded eyes. "Julius." "Yeah. Thank you for coming. I know I didn't ask you to, but I'm glad you're here. There's nowhere else I'd rather be." "You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to be nice. I'm saying it because it's true." Julius looked from Daniel to Lois. "You two you're incredible. And I'm honored to be part of your lives, even in this small way." Lois was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Eric called yesterday." Julius's head snapped up. "What?" "I guess someone told him I'd had the baby. He called from an unknown number, said he wanted to," she gestured vaguely, "be involved again. Said leaving was a mistake." Rage, hot and immediate, flooded Julius's veins. "What did you say?" "I told him no. Told him he gave up his rights when he walked away. Then I blocked the number." Lois's voice was steady, certain. "Daniel deserves better than a father who only shows up when it's convenient. He deserves someone who chooses to be here, every day, even when it's hard. He has you. That's more than enough." "Maybe." Lois looked at Julius holding her son. "But it would be nice if he had other people too. People who see his worth not because they have to, but because they want to." The implication hung in the air between them. Julius met her eyes, saw the tentative trust there, the olive branch being carefully extended. "I'd like that," he said quietly. I'd like to be someone Daniel can count on. If you'll let me. I think Lois paused, choosing her words carefully. I think I'm ready to start letting people in again. Start believing that not everyone is going to leave. It wasn't forgiveness, not quite. But it was close. And Julius would take it. A nurse came in to check Lois's vitals and gently suggested that she should rest. Julius carefully handed Daniel back to his mother, watching as Lois tucked her son against her chest with practiced ease, like she'd been doing it forever instead of just a few hours. I should let you sleep, Julius said, standing. But I'll come back later, if that's okay. That would be nice. Maybe bring some real food? Hospital meals are terrible. Julius smiled. Consider it done. As he left the hospital and stepped out into the November morning, Julius felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not the empty ambition of acquiring more wealth or building a bigger empire, but genuine purpose rooted in caring about someone beyond himself. Lois and Daniel needed him. Not for his money, though that helped, but for his presence, his support, his commitment to being someone they could trust. Julius could do that. Would do that. Because 3 months ago, he'd been given a gift, a security camera revealing his own blindness, forcing him to see the person he'd become. And now he had a chance to become someone different. Someone better. Someone worthy of the trust Lois was slowly, carefully beginning to give him. But as Julius drove home, his phone rang. Marcus, his voice urgent. Sir, we have a problem. Eric has shown up at the estate. He's demanding to see Lois and the baby. He has a lawyer with him. They're citing paternity rights. Julius's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The past wasn't done with them yet. Julius turned the car around before Marcus finished explaining the situation. Eric Davidson stood at the estate gates with a lawyer in a cheap suit and an expression that mixed entitlement with desperation. Through the security camera feed that Marcus pulled up on his tablet, Julius could see Nancy sitting in a beaten-up car behind them, her face carefully blank. So that relationship had fallen apart. Julius felt no sympathy. Don't let them onto the property, Julius instructed Marcus. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Sir, the lawyer is threatening legal action. He's citing biological father's rights. Let him cite whatever he wants. Lois is in the hospital recovering from childbirth. They're not getting anywhere near her or Daniel. Julius made 2 calls on the drive back. First to his lawyer, one of the best family law attorneys in the state, pulling her from her morning coffee with an urgency that had her agreeing to meet him immediately. Second to the hospital, ensuring that Lois's room was marked as restricted, that no one except pre-approved visitors would be allowed in. By the time he arrived at the estate, Eric had been waiting for 20 minutes and was starting to get agitated. Julius parked his car, took a breath to calm the rage churning in his gut, and approached the gate. Mr. Davidson, what can I do for you? Eric looked Julius up and down, taking in the expensive clothes, the confident posture, the obvious wealth. Something bitter crossed his face. You can tell Lois I want to see my son. Ms. Carter is currently unavailable, and I believe she already communicated to you that she wasn't interested in your involvement. She doesn't get to decide that, the lawyer interjected, stepping forward. Mr. Davidson has legal rights as the biological father. We're prepared to pursue this in court if necessary. Julius turned his attention to the lawyer, his expression cold. And I'm prepared to fight you every step of the way. Ms. Carter is my employee. She and her child are under my protection. If you'd like to pursue legal action, my attorneys are at your disposal. He pulled out a business card and handed it through the gate. Jennifer Morrison, family law specialist. She's expecting your call. The lawyer glanced at the card, and something in his expression shifted. He recognized the name. Everyone who practiced family law in the state recognized Jennifer Morrison's name, and they knew she didn't lose cases. Look, Eric said, his voice taking on a pleading tone, I just want to see my kid. Is that so wrong? I made a mistake leaving Lois. I know that. But that doesn't mean I should lose my son. You didn't make a mistake, Julius said, his voice hard. You made a choice. You chose to abandon your pregnant wife for her best friend. You chose to quit your job and leave the state to avoid child support. You chose to only return when it was convenient for you. Those weren't mistakes, Eric. Those were deliberate actions that showed Lois and your unborn child exactly how little they mattered to you. You don't know anything about it, Eric started. I know enough. I know Lois worked 3 jobs while pregnant because you took your savings and spent it on another woman. I know she lost her apartment because you refused to pay what you owed. I know she ended up in a shelter, 7 months pregnant and terrified, because you decided your happiness mattered more than your responsibilities. And you're so much better. Eric's voice turned vicious. Rich man swooping in to save the poor pregnant woman? What's in it for you, huh? Are you sleeping with my wife? Julius felt Marcus tense beside him. Forced himself to stay calm. Ms. Carter is not your wife. Your wife is the woman sitting in that car who helped you destroy your marriage. And what's in it for me is being a decent human being, which is apparently a concept you don't understand. I want a paternity test, Eric demanded. I want to establish my rights. Fine. We'll do a paternity test through the court system. Ms. Carter will want that anyway, for the child support you're about to start paying. But let me be clear, Eric. Even if the test confirms what we already know, that you're Daniel's biological father, it doesn't give you automatic access. You abandoned them. You'll have to prove to a judge that you're fit to be in this child's life. And based on your actions over the past 8 months, I'd say your chances are slim to none. Eric's face reddened with anger and humiliation. You can't keep me from my son. Actually, I can. Not forever, but long enough for Ms. Carter to make her case to the court. Long enough for her to establish that Daniel is thriving without you. Long enough for a judge to see that you're not acting in the child's best interest, you're acting in yours. The lawyer put a hand on Eric's arm. We should go. Pursue this through proper legal channels. Yeah, you do that, Julius said. And when you're drafting your paperwork, make sure to include the 8 months of unpaid support, the abandonment claim, and the fact that your client actively hid from his responsibilities until it was convenient to return. I'm sure the judge will be very sympathetic. Eric looked like he wanted to say more, but the lawyer was already pulling him back toward the car. Nancy didn't even look up as they got in and drove away. Julius watched them leave, his heart still pounding with adrenaline and anger. Marcus stood beside him, silent until the car disappeared from sight. That went well, Marcus said dryly. He'll be back. With a better lawyer and a sob story about being reformed. Yes, sir. But we'll be ready. Julius pulled out his phone and called Jennifer. Spent the next hour on a call with her, explaining the situation, forwarding all the documentation Marcus had gathered about Eric's abandonment. By the time he hung up, he felt better about their legal position. Not certain, family courts were notoriously unpredictable, but better. Then he drove back to the hospital. Lois was awake when he arrived, nursing Daniel with a confidence that seemed impossible for someone who'd only been a mother for hours. She looked up when Julius knocked, her expression shifting to concern when she saw his face. What's wrong? Julius sat down heavily in the visitor's chair. Eric showed up at the estate. With a lawyer. He wants access to Daniel. Lois's arms tightened protectively around her baby. No. I know. I've already called my lawyer. We're prepared to fight this. Your lawyer? Julius, I can't afford. It's taken care of. Consider it part of your employment benefits. Legal support for any issues that might affect your ability to do your job, which this definitely qualifies as. Lois stared at him. Why are you doing this? Because it's right. Because Eric doesn't deserve to disrupt your life again. Because Daniel deserves better. Julius leaned forward, his voice intense. Lois, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Do you want Eric in Daniel's life? Not what you think you should want, not what's legally complicated, but what do you actually want? Lois looked down at her son, her expression fierce and protective and absolutely certain. No, I don't. He had his chance and he walked away. I'm not going to let him break Daniel's heart the same way he broke mine. Then we fight. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we fight. Julius, even with your lawyer, this could get complicated. Paternity rights are. I don't care. We'll establish that he abandoned you. We'll document his failure to provide support. We'll show that Daniel is thriving without him. And if the court still grants him any access, we'll make sure it's supervised and limited and completely on your terms. Lois's eyes filled with tears. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Because you matter. Daniel matters. And I'm not going to let Eric hurt you again if I have any power to stop it. They sat in silence for a moment. Daniel finished nursing and Lois shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently until he burped. The simple domesticity of the moment felt surreal given the legal battle looming ahead. There's something else, Julius said carefully. Something I've been thinking about. A way to protect you and Daniel more permanently. What do you mean? Julius took a breath. This was it. The moment he'd been building toward, the solution that had been forming in his mind for weeks. I want to adopt Daniel. Lois froze. What? Hear me out. If I legally adopt him, Eric's biological claim becomes much more complicated. We'd have to establish that it's in Daniel's best interest, which given Eric's abandonment and my stable home environment and resources, wouldn't be that difficult. It would give Daniel security, legal protection, a father figure who's actually committed to being there. Julius, that's huge. That's permanent. You barely know us. I know enough. I know you're an incredible mother. I know Daniel deserves someone who chooses to be his father instead of someone who only shows up when it's convenient. I know I want to be that person, if you'll let me. Lois shook her head slowly. This is crazy. You can't just adopt someone's baby because it's legally convenient. You're right. So let me tell you the other reason I want to do this. Julius met her eyes, his heart pounding. I'm in love with you, Lois. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. I know it's too soon, Julius continued quickly. I know I have no right to feel this way after what I did. But watching you these past 3 months, seeing your strength, your determination, your grace in the face of everything life's thrown at you, I fell in love. With your mind, your spirit, your fierce protective love for your son. And he swallowed hard, I want to be part of your family. Not as your employer, not as someone trying to ease his guilt, but as someone who genuinely wants to build a life with you. Lois stared at him, her expression unreadable. Julius. I'm not asking you to love me back. I'm not even asking you to give me an answer right now. But I'm asking you to think about it. Think about what it would mean for Daniel to have legal protection from Eric. Think about what it would mean to have someone committed to being there, not just financially but actually present. And if someday you could see me as more than just your employer, his voice cracked, I'd be the luckiest man alive. The silence stretched out. Daniel stirred in Lois's arms, making small sounds. She looked down at her son, her expression complicated. I'm scared, she finally whispered. I know. Eric said he loved me too. He made promises. And then he destroyed me. I'm not Eric. How do I know that? How do I know you won't wake up one day and realize that a ready-made family with a woman who used to clean your toilets isn't what you actually want? Julius stood and moved to the bed, careful not to crowd Lois but needing her to see his face, the absolute truth in his eyes. You don't know that. Not for certain. But Lois, I can tell you that I've spent the last 3 months trying to prove I'm better than the man who fired you. And the past few weeks realizing that I don't want to just be better for you, I want to be better with you. You make me want to be the kind of man my mother would have been proud of. The kind of man Daniel can look up to. The kind of man who sees the person he loves as an equal partner, not a project or a problem to solve. This is insane, Lois said, but her voice was soft, not rejecting. Maybe. But my whole life I've made the logical decision, the business decision, the choice that made sense on paper. And I've ended up alone in a mansion that's never felt like home. You and Daniel, this feels like home. That doesn't make sense. It's not logical, but it's true. Lois looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for lies or manipulation or hidden motives. Julius let her look, keeping his expression open and vulnerable. I need time, she finally said. I need to figure out what I actually want versus what's just convenient or safe. And I need to make sure that if I let you into our lives like this, it's because I want you there, not because I'm scared of Eric or need your protection. Take all the time you need. The offer stands, no expiration date, no pressure. And if I say no to the marriage part but yes to the adoption? Then I adopt Daniel and we remain employer and employee who co-parent successfully. Whatever you need, Lois. This isn't an ultimatum or a package deal. I want you to choose what's right for you and Daniel, not what's convenient for me. Lois smiled slightly. You've really changed from the man who fired me. That man was an idiot who couldn't see what was right in front of him. I'm trying not to make that mistake again. A nurse came in to check on Lois, and Julius took it as his cue to leave. But as he reached the door, Lois called his name. Yeah. Thank you. For offering. For caring. For fighting for us. Whatever I decide, I want you to know that means everything. Julius nodded, his throat too tight for words, and left. The next 2 months were a blur of legal battles and tentative bridges being built. Eric's paternity test confirmed what everyone knew, but it also opened the door for custody arguments. His lawyer painted him as a reformed man who'd made mistakes but wanted to do right by his son. Julius's lawyer painted him as an opportunist who'd abandoned his responsibilities and only returned when someone else had cleaned up his mess. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense, listened to both sides and ordered supervised visitation while the case proceeded. Eric got 2 hours a week with Daniel, supervised by a social worker, while the court evaluated whether expanded custody would be in the child's best interest. Lois hated it. Hated having to hand her baby over to the man who destroyed her. But she complied because she had no choice, and because Julius's lawyer assured her that her compliance would look good to the judge. Through it all, Julius was there. Not hovering, not controlling, but present. He attended the court hearings. He sat with Lois through the supervised visits, offering silent support. He helped interview nannies when Lois realized she needed help with Daniel so she could continue her estate manager duties. He learned how to change diapers and make bottles and rock a crying baby at 2 a.m. when Lois was too exhausted to function. He became part of their lives not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And slowly, so slowly that neither of them quite noticed when it happened, Lois's walls came down. It started with small things. Lois inviting Julius to join her and Daniel for dinner in the guest house. Julius reading to Daniel before bed, doing funny voices that made Lois laugh. Long conversations after Daniel was asleep, about everything and nothing, about their pasts and hopes and fears. Lois told Julius about growing up with parents who loved her fiercely, about losing them too young, about the loneliness of being completely alone in the world. About meeting Eric and believing she'd finally found someone to build a new family with, only to have that dream shattered. Julius told Lois about his mother's sacrifice, about building his wealth and losing his humanity in the process, about the emptiness of success without purpose. About watching that security footage and seeing himself clearly for the first time in years, hating what he saw. They learned each other's stories. And in learning, they began to heal. 3 months after Daniel was born, the judge issued her ruling. Eric would continue to have supervised visitation, but no overnight stays. He would pay child support retroactively from the date of Daniel's birth. And if he missed more than 2 consecutive visits, his custody would be reviewed with the possibility of complete termination of parental rights. It wasn't everything Lois wanted, but it was enough. Eric made it to 3 visits before he stopped showing up. The drive from wherever he and Nancy had ended up was too far, the supervised visits too restrictive, the reality of actual parenting too hard. He wanted the idea of being a father more than the actual work of it. 6 weeks after his last visit, Eric's lawyer filed paperwork relinquishing his parental rights. No explanation, no apology. Just a legal document that effectively erased him from Daniel's life. Lois should have felt relief. Instead, she felt a complicated grief for the man Eric could have been but chose not to be. Grief for Daniel, who would grow up never knowing his biological father. Grief for herself, for the 6 years she'd spent believing in someone who'd never deserved her faith. She cried in Julius's arms that night, and he held her without judgment or platitudes, just solid presence while she grieved. "He's really gone," she whispered. "Yeah. Daniel's going to ask about him someday. And you'll tell him the truth. That his biological father made choices that had nothing to do with Daniel's worth. That being a father is about showing up, not just genetics." Lois pulled back to look at Julius. "Is your adoption offer still on the table?" "Always. I want you to do it. I want you to be Daniel's legal father. Not because I need protection from Eric anymore, but because," she paused, then pushed forward, "because you've already been his father in all the ways that matter. You chose us. You showed up. You stayed. That's what being a parent is." Julius's eyes filled with tears. "Lois. I'm not saying this because I feel obligated. I'm saying it because it's true. Daniel loves you. She took a breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you too." "You think?" Lois smiled through her tears. "I'm scared to be certain. But I know that when you're not here, I miss you. I know that you make me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how. I know that you see me, really see me, and I've never had that with anyone before. So yeah, I think I'm falling in love with you. Is that enough?" "It's everything." Julius cupped her face gently. "Can I kiss you?" "Please." The kiss was soft, tentative, tasting of salt tears and new beginnings. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "So," Julius said, "adoption and dating. That's the plan." "Actually, I was thinking bigger." Lois pulled back, suddenly nervous. "I was thinking marriage." Julius's eyes widened. "Lois. Not because it's practical or legally convenient, though it would make the adoption easier, but because I want to choose my family this time. I want to marry someone who sees me as an equal partner, who loves my son like his own, who makes me believe in happy endings even after everything I've been through. I want to marry you, Julius. If you'll have me." Julius laughed, the sound bright with joy and disbelief. "If I'll have you? Lois, I've been in love with you for months. I was just trying to give you time, trying not to pressure you, trying to be the patient noble guy who—" "Stop being noble and say yes." "Yes. God, yes. 1,000 times yes." They kissed again, longer this time, full of promise and hope and the kind of happiness that comes from choosing love instead of having it happen to you. From the nursery, Daniel started to cry. They broke apart, laughing, and went to him together. As Julius lifted his son, soon to be his son legally as well as in his heart, into his arms, he thought about the security camera that had changed everything. About a blocked drain and a woman's invisible labor and the moment of truth that had shattered his blindness. Sometimes the best things in life come from the worst mistakes. Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what really matters. Sometimes the person you fire becomes the person you can't imagine living without. Julius looked at Lois, at Daniel, at the family he'd found in the wreckage of his own cruelty. And he knew beyond any doubt that he'd finally found home. You know, life has a funny way of bringing the right people together, doesn't it? Sometimes through the strangest circumstances, the most painful moments, we find exactly what we didn't know we needed. If this story touched you, if it made you believe in second chances and chosen families, maybe hit that subscribe button. There are more stories like this waiting to be told, more reminders that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. And drop a comment below, let us know where you're watching from and if you believe in second chances. We'd love to hear from you. It's been a year since Lois and Julius tied the knot. The garden was perfect. Late autumn sun cast everything in gold. The roses Julius's mother had planted decades ago blooming one last time before winter. White chairs were arranged in careful rows. A small group of people gathered to witness a beginning that had grown from an ending. Lois stood at the edge of the aisle, Daniel on her hip, both of them dressed in their finest. At 14 months old, Daniel was walking now, chattering in his own language, pointing at everything with curiosity and delight. He had his mother's eyes and her fierce spirit, but he had Julius's smile. Or maybe Julius had started smiling more because of him. It was hard to tell anymore where one part of their family ended and another began. "Ready?" Marcus asked, appearing beside Lois in a suit that made him look distinguished instead of just tired. He'd been promoted to Chief of Operations for the Whitmore estate, a position that acknowledged what he'd really been doing for years. He'd also become something like a grandfather to Daniel, the family growing in unexpected ways. "I'm terrified," Lois admitted. "Good. That means it matters." Lois smiled. "How did you get so wise?" 53 years of making mistakes and occasionally learning from them. Music started, a string quartet playing something beautiful and simple. The guests stood. Lois took a breath and walked forward, Marcus on one side, Daniel reaching toward Julius on the other. Julius stood at the end of the aisle, looking like he might cry. He'd never been good at hiding his emotions anymore, not since a security camera had forced him to confront them. Lois loved that about him now, the vulnerability he'd learned to show, the way he wore his heart openly instead of hiding behind walls of wealth and indifference. The ceremony was short and sweet, the words mattering less than the commitment behind them. They'd written their own vows, promises that acknowledged the complicated path that had brought them here. "I promise to see you," Julius said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "To really see you every day, in all the ways you deserve to be seen. To honor your strength, support your dreams, and never take for granted the gift of being chosen by you." "I promise to trust you," Lois responded. "To believe in the man you've become and the father you've chosen to be. To build a life with you based on partnership and respect, and to choose you every day, the way you chose us when we had nothing. I promise to be the father Daniel needs, not just legally but in every way that matters. To show up, to stay present, to love him as fiercely as you do. I promise to let you be that father. To share this journey of raising him, the joy and the challenges, as true partners." They exchanged rings, simple bands that meant everything. The officiant pronounced them married, and Julius kissed his wife while their son cheered and the small crowd applauded. The reception was held on the East Lawn, the same area that had once smelled like sewage from a blocked drain. That problem had been permanently fixed months ago, the entire system updated at Julius's insistence. He couldn't walk past that area without thinking about what Lois had sacrificed, what he'd almost destroyed through his blindness. Now it was beautiful. Now it was where they celebrated new beginnings. Patricia was there, having been let go months earlier and replaced by a management team that actually valued the staff. She'd come to apologize to Lois, to congratulate them, to acknowledge her own failures in enabling Julius's worst behavior. Lois had accepted the apology with grace, understanding that hurt people, that Patricia had her own story of disappointment and survival. The diner where Lois used to work sent flowers, a card signed by all her former coworkers. The grocery store that fired her had gone out of business 3 months ago, karma in action. Julius hadn't been involved, but he hadn't been sad about it either. Eric and Nancy were nowhere to be seen. The last anyone heard, they'd moved somewhere in the Midwest, their relationship having fallen apart within months of getting together. Eric had signed away his parental rights and faded from their lives like a bad dream you barely remember. Some people stayed stuck in their mistakes. Julius and Lois had chosen to grow from theirs. As the evening wore on, Julius found Lois sitting on a bench near his mother's roses, watching Daniel play with Marcus and some of the staff's children. "Happy?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Completely." She leaned against him. "It's still surreal sometimes. A year ago I was in a shelter, terrified and alone. Now she gestured at the garden, the celebration, the life they'd built here. A year ago I was alone in a mansion, rich and miserable. Now I'm here too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son laugh and play, surrounded by people who'd become family. Julius. "Yeah. Thank you for watching that security footage. For letting it change you instead of just making you feel guilty. Thank you for giving me a chance when you had every reason not to." Lois smiled. "You know what's funny? That drain being blocked was the best thing that could have happened to us. If it hadn't forced that moment, if Marcus hadn't made you watch the footage, we might never have found each other. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. Sometimes they do." Daniel ran over, demanding to be picked up, and Julius scooped him into his arms. His son, legally as of 3 months ago when the adoption was finalized. His son in every way that mattered, the best decision he'd ever made. "Dada," Daniel said, pointing at a bird in the roses. "Bird." "That's right, buddy. That's a bird. Bird." Daniel repeated with absolute delight at his own knowledge. Julius looked at Lois, at Daniel, at the garden his mother had designed decades ago, never knowing it would someday host her son's wedding to a woman who taught him how to see again. He thought about the man he used to be. Cold, blind, measuring worth by productivity and appearances. That man had fired Lois for being too slow, never looking deeper, never seeing the truth. That man was gone. In his place was someone who'd learned that real success wasn't measured in wealth or status, but in love given and received. In showing up. In choosing to see people as fully human instead of convenient or inconvenient. The security camera had revealed the truth about Lois's work that day. But more than that, it had revealed the truth about Julius himself. And he'd had the courage, finally, to look at that truth and change. As the sun set over the Whitmore estate, painting everything in shades of gold and pink, Julius held his wife and son and felt, for the first time in his entire life, genuinely wealthy. Not because of his bank account or his property or his business success, but because he had a family. A real family, built on choice and commitment and love that grew from the ruins of mistakes. "Ready to go home?" Lois asked, standing and reaching for Daniel. Julius looked at the guest house where they'd been living, where they'd built their life together. They'd talked about moving into the main mansion, but Lois preferred the coziness of the smaller space. Julius found he preferred it too. Size didn't matter when you had everything you needed. "Yeah," he said, taking her hand. "Let's go home." They walked through the garden together, their son between them, their future ahead of them, their past finally, blessedly behind them. Sometimes justice comes from the strangest places. Sometimes it comes from a security camera revealing truths we need to see. Sometimes it comes from having the courage to change, to grow, to become better than who we were. And sometimes, when we're very lucky, justice looks like love. Life doesn't always give us the endings we deserve. But sometimes, when we're brave enough to see our mistakes and humble enough to change, it gives us the endings we need. Lois and Julius's story reminds us that it's never too late to become better, to see people clearly, to choose love over convenience. That the people we overlook might be exactly the people we need. That security cameras can reveal more than we bargained for. And that sometimes, the best families are the ones we choose. If you enjoyed this journey, if it reminded you that redemption is possible and second chances are real, we'd love for you to join our community. Subscribe to see more stories about real people facing real challenges and finding their way to unexpected joy. And please, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Do you believe people can really change? Have you ever been given a second chance that changed your life? We read every comment, and your stories matter to us. Until tomorrow, remember, everyone has a story. Everyone deserves to be seen. And sometimes the person who seems too slow is actually the person working hardest when no one's watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in the power of redemption.